Yeah, it is, isn't it? And are you starting to see the links between the ATMs and the FI lessons? Yeah. How many guys are teaching ATM at this point? How many of you taught more than 20 ATM lessons before your practicum? More than 20 ATM lessons before you did your practicum. Not quite. Yeah. Yeah. How many of you? How many of you? The ATM was your practicum was the first ATM that you taught. It's not a disgrace. It's just I'm just curious. I mean, these are the yeah. You had practice practicums. Yeah. Okay. So how many of you are going to practice FI before your practicum? Yeah, thousands. Why not? No, it's a really interesting discussion. I was just having the discussion with Doris. Yeah. You want to say what the 2 points of the discussion were that you were mentioning?
Do you mean about the two different messages?
Yeah, the 2 different messages.
I've said that I sometimes got the feeling I was receiving 2 contradictory messages, and some of this may be going on in my perception, in my head, but one was that Feldenkrais is amazing. It can transform people's lives. It can change things dramatically and is very effective. The other message is that Feldenkrais is obscure, nebulous, difficult to grasp, that we must be prepared that when we go out into the world and try and teach it and practice it, that we'll have difficulties, that we'll get anxious and feel inadequate. And I only recently recognized this dichotomy, and I felt in myself that it was cross-motivation. That's what I felt. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying that's what's happening, but that's how I felt about it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that those are both sides of that coin are pretty accurate for us. Is when we go into the public, I mean, it's easy for the people in the public to go into something that they have an idea of what it was. I mean, when I was coming up, back in the old days, I tell you, but I was doing yoga classes in 1973 in Mexico. I can tell you, there weren't any. If you said you were doing yoga, I mean, my parents wrote me a letter, "Dear Jeff, is this a time when you decided to take drugs?" Because I was talking about yoga and the ideas of joining and being one with and all this stuff. And my parents were like, "Oh, what's going on with you?" And here I was taking yoga classes when I was living in Mexico. I was living in Mexico, so I could playing basketball actually, but so I mean, and it's 1980 to today, so 30 years or early 70s, 40 years, almost 50 years, and you can see that there's a massive change in the public with the view of yoga practice, meditation practice. For the most part, people have an idea that they know what they're entering into. And for the Feldenkrais method, if you go to a martial arts class, you have a sense that you're going to wear a gi and you're going to train in some kind of way. And there's enough information about Pilates that you're going to be involved in Pilates exercise or work with a reformer or something like that. And for the meditation, you have all the different forms of meditation. You have the compassionate meditations of the Tibetans. You have the Zen meditations. You have the mindfulness meditation processes, but people more or less have a sense of what it is. But when they come to this work, they don't know when they enter the work what it is, and a lot of it has to do with the way that we create the context for them to experience themselves. What is the message that we're offering them for that's going to be valuable to them? Because as far as I understand it, all of you, very few of you are going to be able to do this as healthcare providers that you're licensed. And it creates a really difficulty because someone then has to decide that they're going to take 10 of their cups of coffee and or more, and with their discretionary income, they're going to find and they're going to give their discretionary income to you in a way that they think that it's worth them spending that money to be with you. And they're basically, ultimately, what they're investing the money in is not the Feldenkrais method. They're investing in the opportunity to be in the experience with you, and you'll be utilizing the Feldenkrais method to help them experience that to be in that experience with you. I think it's a very, very interesting thing that we have, but the people have to. Oh, cake. Whose cake? I'm not going to be here for the cake. So part of the reason that I want these 2 weeks that we've had together to be so concrete, really, really concrete, is for you to know within yourself how concrete and how clear this process can be with people. Yeah? Because, yeah, we can do really nice things and people can walk away and have a very nice experience, but at some point in time, they have to say, that was worth my expenditure. You know? So what is it that we're going to offer? What is it that you're going to offer that they say, see, I'm going to have a nice meal with my spouse and a movie, or I'm going to go and have an FI lesson? Yeah. And that because many people in the general public don't have that much discretionary income, do they? Now, the thing is that if they look really carefully at what they spend their discretionary income on, yeah, there are many areas that they spend their discretionary income on that they could, that you can look to see whether that it provides value. So how are you going to give something of a value that they say, going to my ATM class is something that I look forward to. And then how will you make the ATM class have the value in it that people would have for going to their Tai Chi class, or going to their yoga class, or going to their meditation class, or going to the other kinds of classes that they tend to go through, by which they are seeking something. They're seeking a particular kind of exercise, they're seeking a particular kind of mindfulness, they're seeking a particular way of being with themselves. And so you're having to not only deal with their discretionary income, but then you're having to deal with all the choices that they have to make about how they spend their money on getting for themselves what it is that what they're seeking. So I don't think that the Feldenkrais method is that nebulous, but we have to be more clear as to what we're offering. How do we say this value, and here's I believe that it's something that's a little difficult, that in the very beginning, when you're first learning to teach, you don't want to burn the bridges into the public that you want to teach, because you don't teach with the kind of way where, people oftentimes will go, oh, that's Feldenkrais. Now I know what Feldenkrais is, and well, I'm done with that. That happens, yeah. So I think when you're in the training, for me personally, this whole process of really, really teaching as many ATM classes in very, in ways with people that you're comfortable with, until your ability to give your message, your individual message, begins to come out, so that you are something that's somehow attractive to the people you're working with. Yeah? It's an interesting and unique opportunity for everybody. I know my own journey with teaching awareness through movement. So when we graduated, we didn't have anything. We really didn't. There were no notes. There was one set of tapes. Bruce Holmes set the set of tapes. We didn't have access to any of the videotape of Moshe offered. There was no Alexander E&I. There was no Berkeley series. There was no all the ATM lessons that have been no Esalen series, no nothing. You know? So then how do you take this work into the public? So.
I hope I can say this coherently.
Yeah.
I hear everything you've said, and I'm sure of course it's all true. But there's a lot of people out there who set up a small business practicing something nebulous that no one's ever heard of.
Yes.
I can't think of, but I'm thinking Reiki or energetic healing or
right.
family constellations or et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
And they face those challenges, and we face those challenges, and those challenges are real.
Yes.
And some of those people go on to make a great career for themselves, and they're known and they provide something of value, and some of them don't.
Right.
And I need to know that. We all need to know that. But I feel that I feel as though I'm hearing that side of the story more
right.
than I'm hearing the other side of the story. And it makes me feel as though I'm in an FI when someone is showing me the difference between falling in on myself and lifting up through myself.
Yes.
And they're really belaboring the falling in on myself
right.
that I already know well,
right.
to the extent where I forget how it felt
right.
to lift up through myself.
Exactly.
And I know that Feldenkrais is powerful and transformative and amazing, but I would like to hear that message more and have that message be given equal weight, equal time, equal airspace with the other message that says it's going to be difficult and challenging. Yes, but I already have those fears and I don't need someone to remind me of them. Whereas I would like to be reminded more often of how wonderful Feldenkrais is and how it feels to be lifted through myself, because I've only glimpsed that sometimes and I truly believe it, but I'm looking for more support for that message and less support for the other message.
Yeah. Isn't she doing a marvelous job with the message? Yeah, that's fantastic, isn't it? I mean, she really is on point in the way that she's bringing out the message. Yeah. Beautiful. Yeah. Really, really beautiful. I mean, that you, and to me, that's the place where the other message begins. Is how do I tell my story in such a way? What attracted you to the work? What was the experience that you had?
I just knew from the first minute I did an ATM that there was something magic and amazing in there that I had to follow, and I didn't know what it was.
Right. Yeah. So there's your first introductory talk to the people that you're going to talk to. Yeah. I'll tell you, that's a very interesting. In 1972, I was at Oregon State University, and one of my speech professors, we would go to class, and he would do. It was a particular class in group discussion processes, and he always did a Charlotte Silver sensory relaxation process before the class started. And one day he came in and he did about 15 minutes of something that he'd done over the weekend. And I was going, this is my 5th year. I was a redshirt basketball player. So I sat out a year. So I was there at school for 5 years. And there was something so implicitly intelligent in those 15 minutes. After having run my butt up and down the basketball court and killed myself, hour after hour in motor skills training. And then there was something that was so curious, so implicit about. And I read the Awareness Through Movement book when it came out in 1972. And it was just in the background. And I didn't have any association to it. I graduated my degree. I went to Mexico. I trained. I started studying yoga. I started studying meditation. I was playing basketball at the time that I was down there. I came back. I was teaching high school. I had a degree in intercultural education. I had my teaching certificates. So I was teaching high school, and then I went back and I helped the man who was the speech professor. I helped him put on a conference at Oregon State. And in that conference, a guy named George Leonard did an Aikido demonstration. And I saw the demonstration. I turned in my resignation at the school the next day because I was going to go to the Bay Area and study Aikido. That night, I went to the professor's house, and on his counter was a brochure for the Institute of Transpersonal Psychology. And Feldenkrais and Aikido were a part of the curriculum. Yeah. And Feldenkrais is on the board of advisors for the school. Yeah. And so when I finally got to the Institute of Transpersonal Psychology, I had both classes in Aikido with one of the Americans that were with the founder of Aikido in the early 60s. And then the hardest thing that happened to me actually at that time was when I got to San Francisco and I got to the Bay Area, I found that Moshe had been running a training that started in 1975. I got there in 1977 that I had no way of knowing about. And the word on the streets was that was the last training he was going to give. Yeah. And then the guy who was the president of the Feldenkrais Guild at that time, a guy named Marty Weiner, was the day that the advertising came out for the Amherst training. I got the advertisement the day it came out, and I had my application in that night. Yeah. It was just knowing that I knew that was where I wanted to be. Yeah. It was really touching for me. I mean, there I was at the Institute of Transpersonal Psychology. I could be trained as a psychologist. I had Aikido teacher, Tai Chi teacher, yoga teacher. Could have gone to physical therapy school, to chiropractic school, to do massage work. I mean, you could just look at the plethora of all the things that could rooted out of that I could have rooted into. And when I looked at what was the most underlying, what's the first stone that they put in a building, the keystone or the foundation stone or I just looked and I said, here, this work has, if you understand the nature of this work, you can go into any other work. Yeah. And so it was very clear for me that, that I wanted to spend my time with Moshe, and that I had the great good fortune to actually meet him personally and spend at the very end of his life. He died in July. I spent all of August and part of September in 1983 at his house. And it was always a question as to who was giving who lessons, but but I gave lessons twice a day to Moshe. Yeah. And and the stories are, I mean, he was such in the Native American tradition, it's called a coyote. He was just so clever in the way that he would create conditions that would force you to just the world just. One of the great shearing moments was I was at his house. Did I tell you this? I mean, I don't know who the last person I told this was. Huh? I was at his house, and he was sitting there. All the trainers were gone. Half the group was in Amherst, half the group was teaching in Tel Aviv. He wasn't getting his usual lessons from the people that he got lessons from. He had a physical therapist that came in and took him for walks and took him would take him outside and stuff, and no one from our work was actually working with Moshe in his own work. It was really bizarre. So I'm sitting there with him one day, and the physical therapist guy left. He was really a lovely man, and Moshe was so generous. He had a really nice way of being with the man as well. But the man left, and he looked over at me and he said, "So what do you think of that?" And I said, "Well, to be honest, Moshe, I think I can give you a better lesson." And he looked at me and he said, "Doesn't matter what you think." Now, where do you think I went in my 5-year-old place of being at that point in time? Like, oh, yeah. And I festered in that place of just simmering sense of futility, sense of just in myself with, I mean, I couldn't have crawled into a deeper hole and wanted to escape faster. And I'm sitting there, and I'm under his gaze, and then he turns and looks at me and he says, "It only matters what you do." And that was his invitation to me. Yeah. So here's though is the part that just made me just nuts for the longest period of time. So I'm there at his house the next day, and he had a nurse. Now, Dorit was her name. She was the Nurse Ratched of nurses. If you know One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, do you know the story? So what would happen is that people would want to go to visit Moshe during the day, and they would be met at the door with Nurse Ratched, who wouldn't let anybody in. I mean, she was fierce, but I went to knock on the door, and she was looking like this, and she went, and she fell in on herself, and so she let me in. Well, so Nurse Ratched, or Dorit was her name, was running around Moshe's bed. And he looks at me, he says, "She never thinks, she only acts." So he's told me now, it doesn't matter what you think, it doesn't matter, it only matters how you act. And then on the other hand, she says, she only acts. She never thinks. And I have to tell you that was one of the most, I mean, I'm sitting there and I'm just literally, for those of you any of you read Don Juan and Carlos Castaneda? Okay, so some of you read that. So he's got two brujos, both of them talking to him, and he's in a trance, and they literally split his mind with the way that they're talking in one ear and talking in the other ear. So there's a particular way that you can't do both, so you just open, right? So here I was in this conundrum between, well, it doesn't matter what you do, it doesn't matter what you think, it only matters what you do. She never thinks, she only acts. And literally for that moment, it was like, I'm caught in this place that's not this and not that. And it was really profound, and it was like that the entire time that I was with the 6 weeks I was at Moshe's house. Every conversation, every little thing had within it some way in which there was some obtuse change in the way that I perceived myself. It was incredibly gratifying. And it ended in some, I got accused by Zvi, who was Moshe's brother-in-law, who was a camp survivor, that I had stolen from Moshe because Jeremy had rearranged one of Moshe's rooms, and it was assumed that I'd stolen a bunch of Moshe's materials, which I hadn't. And I went to say goodbye to Moshe, and they wouldn't let me in the house. I never had a chance to actually say goodbye. There were crazy things. I'll tell you one very interesting story that when Moshe asked me to stay, I went to say goodbye to him, and he said, "Will you stay with me?" And I said, "Yeah, I'll be glad to. I'll stay." So I went to the airport that night. I had one day in my apartment left, so I was to fly out, and I had $125 to my name. So I went to the airport and they said, you can stay. You can stay for 6 weeks and it's going to cost you $125. And I'm going, okay. And they say, well, we can't guarantee that you're going to fly out because it's during the holy days. So all the flights are already booked. But you can be here for 6 weeks. So I gave them the $125. That was the money I was going to use when I flew back from Israel to San Francisco to go back to where I was living, Seattle. I didn't have any idea what I was going to do. And I don't know what it was that for a moment even made it even seem like it was a possibility that I could live there without any money or without anything. But I do what I'm going to do. I have the one night, so I end up okay, I'll tell this other little part, but please don't think unkindly of me. I'm riding the bus back. I've got one night in my apartment. I'm riding the bus back, and there's this beautiful Yemenite woman who invites me to her house. She's been called into the army. And so she spends the night with me, and she gives me her apartment for 2 weeks. Yeah. So now this funny thing out of the universe comes an apartment that I have for 2 weeks. And I go to Moshe's house in the morning, and the first thing in the morning, and Baruch is at the door, and he's beside himself. That's Moshe's brother. You know. And if you listen to the Amorous Taste, Moshe never speaks kindly about Baruch. Yeah? The brother that he can't do anything with. Right? And Baruch's beside himself. Now, Baruch has been sitting by Moshe's bed every single night. He sleeps in an armchair next to Moshe. I mean, the act of kindness and caring of Baruch for Moshe after he's had the stroke is incredible. He meets me at the door. He's beside himself, and he says, Jeff, Moshe wants to pay you for lessons. He's never paid anybody for lessons. He wants to pay you for lessons. He wants to pay you 500 shekels a lesson. He wants to pay you $9 a lesson. And he wants 2 lessons a day. So now I have food and I have a place to stay. Yeah. 2 weeks later, the woman comes back. She has a new boyfriend. I get kicked out, which makes sense, right? So I'm bereft again. I've been all day at Moshe's house. And in the evenings after Moshe goes to sleep, I would go to Aikido class. Because the teacher of Aikido was a guy named Eitan Ben Mir, who was a student of Bruce Klickstein's, who was a student people I trained with when we had big seminars, and so we knew each other. And I go and I teach the class. And I walk into the dojo, and he says, Jeff, can you come in the office for a moment? And I said, yeah. I go in the office. He says, Jeff, I just got called in the army. I'm going to be gone for 2 weeks. Can you teach my classes for me? I said, yeah, I'll teach your classes for you. He said, oh, and by the way, you can stay at my apartment. Now, I am not fudging you. I'm not lying to you in the slightest. These pieces of synchronicity happened. And it was just absolutely clear that in that time, whatever the way that the universe conspired, it was meant for me to be there in that time with Moshe. So on the 9th of September, I have this dream that I'm back in Seattle. I mean, it's like I am in the living dream that I'm back in Seattle. And I get to Moshe's house the next morning, and Moshe looks at me and says, oh, you're going back home. And I'm going, and I said, well, Moshe, if you're telling me like this makes you a lousy scientist. No, I said, it makes you like a god. Because we bantered back and forth. I said, this makes you like a god, Moshe. And he said, oh, much better than God. Do you think that God knows these things? And then I said, Moshe, then it makes you a lousy scientist. And this touched me profoundly. He said, if you think anything I taught you had anything to do with science, you're a crazy fucking idiot. Yeah. Now, of course, everything is wrapped in science. Everything I'm giving to you is wrapped in this biomechanics. Everything. Because it still has to be, you have to have a concrete expression that you can use. to help people with their stories. So at 10 o'clock that morning, the phone rings, and they're calling from the airport saying that I have a flight for the 11th. Yeah. So I've had this last moment. Now, there was one person that Moshe worked with for many, many years, a man named Yonatan. And Yonatan was born with a really severe neurological disease, who spent his life in a wheelchair or in a bed. Now, Yonatan was one of the most brilliant men I've ever met. He used the teaching of Milton Erickson and Spinoza. He acted from his bed as a psychologist, and literally, if he wanted you, as soon as you walked in a room, he'd have you in trance. He was brilliant in his ability to create the conditions where a person, the people that he did therapy with, to work using trance to help them find capabilities within themselves. And so if you talk to him, and he said, Moshe taught me everything. Yeah. He said, and here's this man who's, I mean, if he's in a wheelchair and his head falls, he has absolutely no means to get his head back on top of his spine. You have to adjust him and you have to help him. There's the tone within him is just simply not there. And he's been there for all these years. And he said, the greatest feat, Moshe's greatest feat, was when he taught me how to run. Yeah, that was the most liberating moment of my life, when Moshe taught me how to run. So I made arrangements. Moshe wanted to see Yonatan. And I was the only guy that was going to be able to carry Yonatan up the stairs and with his wheelchair up to Moshe's apartment. So I made arrangements for Yonatan to be delivered, and I carried him up the stairs, and I went and got his wheelchair. I helped him get in, and I helped him be with Moshe, and Moshe and Yonatan were together for several hours before I took Yonatan back. And Moshe called me over, and I was taking Yonatan out, and Moshe called me over. He said, I taught him the last thing that he would need. I have no idea what that meant, but he said, I gave him the last piece of what he needs. And I took Yonatan home. I came back to say goodbye, and they wouldn't let me in the door. And I never got to say goodbye to Moshe. Yeah. So it was funny. I was so longing. I'd been there so many times with other people that had been there and had had this embrace and this loving moment with Moshe as they said goodbye, because they were saying goodbye. Because everybody knew that Moshe, the chances of him surviving were. And Zvi and Baruch met me at the door, and there was such anger. I was accused of stealing from Moshe, that I had been the one who. And I hadn't never even been in the room. I mean, a few times I'd look at the books. Moshe's house was a library with the bed in it. Every single wall was covered with books, and every single book was read. Every single book had within it his writing in the margins. Yeah, and so, and any field that you wanted to believe, Moshe said, and I don't know if it was an exaggeration, but he read 10,000 books. He certainly had 4,000 books in his house. You know, and they were all read. Every single book, whether it be reflexology, acupuncture, neurophysiology, cybernetics, physics. I mean, you can almost go. I mean, at some point in time, a woman, when Moshe was ill, had come to his house and wanted to do him a favor, and she alphabetized his books. And it really made him crazy, because Moshe knew where every book was, and he could open any book to any page that he wanted. Yeah, and this woman had alphabetized his books. Well, it's okay. We need to have a little bit of a letdown for a few moments, right? So it's okay. So in Moshe's bookshelf was a paper bag. In that paper bag was probably 150 photocopy. The photocopy was the only existing version of the potent self. The potent self. Yeah? So he had hand typed, or someone had hand typed the book. And at some point in time, it was said, again, please understand, I'm just reporting the news, that the bag that had his transcript in it had fallen to the floor when he was having sex with a woman on his table in his room. And the paper had gone everywhere. Right? Now, well, here's the problem. Moshe never put page numbers on any of his typed pages. Now, who's the hero in this story? The hero coming into the story is Jerry Carson, who sat there for weeks putting the pages in the right number and making the photocopy. Yeah. So, but it's that one copy that Baruch, when Moshe was ill, he had the woman edit it, that he used to edit it and to put the language in. And it was Baruch, and Moshe was horribly upset because he didn't want the book published. He wasn't happy with the book or the outcome of the book. So it wasn't something that he wanted to publish. And it's fortunate for us that he does, because so many of his ideas are so clearly stated within the potent self. Yeah. Again, it requires a lot of reading, and he basically said that the potent self was the body mature behavior for the lay public. So, all right, that's how I got there. That's how I got in the work. But I mean, yeah, I was really, really fortunate to have been, you know, whatever the universe, however the universe conspired or whatever to have those moments and to have that take place. And I've always been extremely grateful. So. I realized I've been teaching this work longer than Moshe taught it himself. Yeah. If I start thinking in terms of 1980 to today, yeah, and we look at Moshe writing Body and Mature Behavior in 1940 and dying in 1983, you add up the years. And so I've been in this work longer than he was actually, he himself teaching his own work. No, yeah. So, and I'm still, I mean, the whole question of projection, you know, when you look at what keeps you from becoming a practitioner or not, one of the things is projection. It's very easy to project. It's called transference in one sense, where you look at the teacher and you say, oh, the teacher has something that I have, but I don't have it, or some kind of projecting power onto someone, or giving your authority to someone who's in the way that you've historically given your authority away. But when you look at the whole world of projection in this way, I am fortunate, because of whatever circumstances, that I can look at Moshe with awe and truly appreciate that's really beyond anything I can do. Some of the things that he put together, I could not begin to put together the things that he's put together. And I can appreciate that I can see something that I can put together within myself. And I personally am willing to be in that practice. Yeah. And I've found that this work as a life work has within it the elements that can give me a practice for my entire life that continually keeps me in the world of curiosity. Yeah. And I mean, the whole process of refinement. I can't tell you how many new things I've done in the last 2 weeks that I've never done in any way that I've practiced, because something within the environment invited to look at something in a way that, wow, let's look at this in this way, which I've never done before. I can't come into the class with a set of notes. I can't write down a script. I guess I could, but I would be off the script in a heartbeat. And then to keep trying to evolve what's coming out and take advantage of things and just keep trying to evolve it. in the most part, again, the meta level is, how does one, look at the environment and continue to put in the environment that which the environment needs if the people in the environment are going to grow in your ATM classes or in the way that you'll be with the public. So I hope that I've been able to give some example of that process for you guys, and for you guys to see that value within. I haven't been emotionally the most stable while I've been here, but there's been days when I've been very kind. There's been other days that have been a little more aggressive or something. So I hope to learn from that. For me, the next chapter for me is it's been 5 years to put this new training program that I'm putting together. I have never, this is a long history. In 1989, I was the president of the Feldenkrais Guild of North America. And at that point in time, you guys don't have it because Don Heggie took care of this for you. You do not have the service marks of the Feldenkrais method here in Australia. Maybe it's changed in all the years, but a guy named Frank Wildman came and he was going to take the service marks. So one of your entrepreneurs bought the marks for himself. And as far as I know, they've never been, the guild does own them now. Okay, so at some point in time there was a change, but in order in the United States to be able to use the service marks, you have to continually provide ongoing education for the practitioners so that you have a basis from which to certify them. Yeah, and it's a legal thing. And there was a huge hue and cry against certification in the Feldenkrais Guild. But if we didn't have certification and ongoing education, we couldn't protect the marks for the people who are going to be practitioners. So we had to make a decision whether the guild was going to stop being a professional organization, providing trainings that were accredited trainings, where that would give people the opportunity to be certified and graduate from the trainings in such a way that they could have the use of the service marks and call themselves Feldenkrais teachers, or to become a club, basically an organization with a newsletter. You had to make the decision at some point in time. You can't not meet, if you're going to have a service mark, then you have to do what it takes to protect the service mark. Now at that point in time, the hue and cry was, as soon as we have certification, we'll crystallize the work. Yeah. So that's a mess. And I mean, it was in Montreal, the guild meeting, the General Assembly was a bloodbath. I mean, literally a bloodbath. And I'm not going to go into the details of it, but I can tell you, I suffered a night of 1,000 cuts that night, personally. But we passed certification, and the guild has, in North America, and the standards of trainings were established, and the ongoing educational processes and ongoing certification was established, and for the most part, as a professional organization, the work has moved along. And then we reached a point in time that at some point in time, as a Feldenkrais guild, for the guild to represent a professional practice, there has to be some degree to which the people that graduate, anybody graduates at this point in time, can become a member of the guild, certified member. If the guild is going to determine the quality of its membership, it has to have some kind of process by which the people that graduate are deemed as competent. There has to be some kind of separation, and that separation has never been made. So I was part of a task force. I was asked by the president of the guild at that time to be a part of a task force, and some of you may know or have heard of Candy Cornino, and who's a brilliant practitioner who's been involved with the whole process of looking at competency for members of the Feldenkrais profession in Europe and also bringing that to the United States. And so we formed a task force, and for 5 years we worked together on how to define the basic competences of a beginning practitioner. And I wanted to hold a training program that was built where the competences were the foundation from which the training was organized. So that's my next thing. I'm building a training. It took 5 years for us to write the competences. It took me almost 3 years for my training program to be accepted. In order for the program to be accepted, a new policy had to be written of a pilot project so that the program can be assessed and all those kind of things. It's been accepted, and it's been, since acceptance, with all the issues that go with acceptance, because it's not a standard program, people have to sign informed consent agreements and all kinds of things. But we've come to this place where the training program is going to begin. So that's my next chapter, is that. And I don't know, personally. I mean, there's an element where I could go off into the sunset and just have a nice little place and just give lessons to the people that come. Yeah. But I like working. I like the challenge of having this work be a little bit more concrete, and people knowing kind of some of the questions that they can ask, just at least in the realm of how do we cancel gravity, and how do we utilize the surfaces, and start looking at differences, and then learning how to actually be in the place where, oh, I'm noticing myself going here. What's the constraint? Yeah. All right. So let's look at, okay, is that something else? Let's look at 3 or 4 or 5 situations just for a moment, and then we'll come back and do another ATM, okay? So you're sitting there like that, perfect. You sit there with your knees like that, good. So you lie on your stomach,